This week, I was originally planning to ramble for 15 minutes about subscription price hikes, but that felt boring even as I was writing the script. Then, I kept seeing a lot of praise online for this new title on Xbox Game Pass called Kunitsu-Gami Path of the Goddess. Developed by Capcom, it is an action strategy game and it can even be called a tower defense game, except instead of a tower, you're defending a maiden. That's what the game's description calls her, by the way. As usual, here's a summary if you are not going to watch the entire video. Path of the Goddess is a must play if you are the sort of gamer who wishes we ought to see new ideas in the market. Well, here's one of the industry giants experimenting with a newish idea with a heavy dosage of Japanese culture and some really well designed action packed levels. It's a visual feast, and the strategy part of the game is kept simple enough to appeal to a wider audience. The game definitely struggles to maintain the pace towards the end and involves a lot of backtracking in order to progress efficiently. But overall, it is quite an excellent title and it is one of the more interesting releases in 2024 so far. Okay, without adding more fluff, let me get straight into the full review. There will be minor spoilers ahead. I simply must start by talking about the visuals because I think that's the selling point of this game. Powered by Capcom's RE engine, the game looks incredibly beautiful. Like I said before, this game is heavily inspired by Japanese culture and you can see it in every scene of the game. One key feature of the game's design is the day and night cycle. During the day, the game features bright colors and a peaceful setting in the various villages that you visit. During the night, when the monsters come out, the visuals feel even more impressive because the bright colors are retained while still adding in the dark touches of night. It's a nice change from other depictions of nighttime in games, which normally tend to be too dark or gloomy. Here, even though there are monsters all around you, nighttime is actually energetic and full of action. There are very few cutscenes sprinkled throughout the game, and since the designers chose not to use dialogue, the visuals have the additional responsibility of conveying the game's story. And they succeed mostly because the story is kept really simple and you already know how it will end. The characters in the game, including the villagers and the monsters, are all very thoughtfully designed. You don't really see the human characters a lot since the game uses masks for most of them, including the protagonist. So the character design can be fully appreciated by looking at the monsters. Each of them are very well detailed and are easily distinguishable. Speaking about the performance, it's great. As usual, I played on my Series X and I didn't really focus on the FPS this time, but the gameplay felt really smooth throughout. On the PC side of things, the developer added an update acknowledging crashes in one particular level, but beyond that, there haven't been any major issues reported by the player base. That's not a surprise because the developers are Capcom's own internal development team with a vast experience of working with the RE engine. Next, let's talk about the gameplay. On the surface, this game's pitch actually seems very similar to Minecraft's original pitch all the way back in 2011. Remember that? Gather resources during the day and prepare yourself for a monster attack at night. It's the same basic idea here, but I still consider Path of the Goddess to be a fresh idea because it makes several changes to that simple formula. To begin with, you're not really gathering too many resources during the day and there is no real crafting. You are only really collecting two things: villagers and the currency required to assign them roles. This currency, called crystals, can be obtained by cleansing the village of the dark matter called defilement. The game is divided into multiple villages or stages, and the idea is that you're going from one village to another, cleansing it of the defilement and allowing the villagers to recover from the destruction caused by the monsters. The core gameplay loop of the game goes like this: you go into a village during the day, setting free as many villagers as you can from the defilement, and assign them various combat roles like a woodcutter, archer, marksman, and so on. At the same time, you need to clear the path for the maiden called Yoshiro to reach a torii, which is a traditional Japanese gate. Clearing the path involves clearing a lot of defilement, so your crystals need to be spent for this as well. Part of the strategy involves planning how many of your crystals you need to spend to assign villagers roles and how many to clear the path for Yoshiro. If Yoshiro doesn't reach the gateway by night, then the Torii gate gets activated and monsters will spill out of it. Defending Yoshiro and killing the monsters will give you crystals, which you can then use the next day to continue your progress towards the gate. If you get too close to a gate before night, the monsters will reach Yoshiro faster. So you have to plan how far you want her to travel during the day in order to set up a good defense. So you're constantly thinking about the best way to plan your defense while also being in the center of the action at night, with a hack and slash dance based combat style to kill the monsters. It may take one or two levels to get used to the entire loop, but once you understand all the pieces of the puzzle, it's very likely that you will quickly love the gameplay loop. Once you free a village from the defilement, there is almost always a boss level. Clearing this boss level is required to unlock the next village. These boss fights keep the gameplay interesting because it is not always tower defense all the time, but they will certainly test your strategic skills. One boss can be ground based, requiring more melee units. Another might be a flying one, requiring more archers and marksmen. Yet another one can be a mix of both, or moves very fast, or performs a huge AoE attack. So you need a combination of all units. In most cases, you will need to fight the boss once to understand the mechanics, fail the stage, and then try again with a good strategy. However, as you keep progressing, your villagers keep getting stronger, and the bosses stop getting new variants. So you can put together a build that can take on any kind of boss. Defeating a boss unlocks a new combat unit, and you can upgrade each unit to make them more effective. You can also upgrade your own character to give them more skills, so that your own combat gets stronger as you progress through the game. The combat itself is very stylish and based on a traditional Japanese dance called Kagura, although I am not sure if weapons were involved in the real life dances. Let's have a look.
神々をもてなし楽しんでいただく魂を招き沈め揺さぶることで活力を与えます。人は神と共に楽しむことで生命力を高めることができると考えてきました。
While these exact moves are not used in the game, you can definitely see the influence. So whenever you are fighting in this game, you are also dancing, and it is a real treat to watch. It's a kind of game where you know it's getting late, but you want to play just one more level before going to bed. The only slight negative thing to mention about the combat is the healing system. Later in the game, you get a dedicated healing unit, but in the beginning, you have to manually heal your troops. This can get exhausting when there's a larger group of 10 or more villagers. All it takes is one huge monster with a huge AoE and half your units will drop down in health immediately. You then have to run around and heal them individually. Apart from that one minor complaint, I really enjoyed the core combat mechanics. There's still a lot to cover, such as the additional skills you get by unlocking special tokens and then making your build stronger by selecting the right tokens. But I don't want to spend the entire review simply talking about the combat. The last thing I do want to focus on about the combat are the bosses themselves. They come in all shapes and sizes, and you can replay all of the stages and boss fights whenever you want. I especially liked one fight with a boss called Buposo because this is the only boss fight where you are alone with no villagers to help you. This one-on-one approach felt really fresh after getting used to group combat for the rest of the game. Buposo even makes things more interesting by switching to a bigger sword once he realizes that he's getting hit real hard. Okay, now let me stop talking about combat, or else this review will go on for an hour. If combat is the action filled, exciting part of the game, the other half of the gameplay is a bit slow. This is where you need to collect another currency called Musubi in order to upgrade your troops and yourself. To do this, you need to oversee repair works in the villages that you have already cleansed. Each repair project requires a certain number of villagers, and sometimes it requires wood as well, which you can conveniently find lying in the streets. Once you authorize repair works, you need to wait a certain period of time, usually until you finish a new stage. Then you need to go back to the village and collect your reward. This constant backtracking between levels just to upgrade your troops can quickly feel boring, especially as the number of levels goes up. A simpler solution would have been to manage all of this through a unified interface, which actually kind of exists in the form of the stage selection screen. You can already see the status of the repairs of each village here. All it is missing is an option to manage those repairs directly from this screen. I think this is the one thing that is holding back this game from being truly good. But since it is such a core gameplay element, I am not sure if it will be modified now. And that's pretty much the gameplay details of Path of the Goddess. The core loop always remains the same. You need to protect Yoshiro, but there is always something new added in each stage. Sometimes it's totally dark and you have to light your way ahead. Sometimes the fight takes place on a group of boats, so you will have little place to move around. And there are other smaller twists that I don't want to spoil here. So in summary, gameplay good. The sound and music of this game are really well done. First, let me quickly talk about the vocals. There's very little dialogue in the game, only at the beginning in fact. And after that, the most dialogue you can hear is Yoshiro calling out to her protector to come and save her if the monsters get too close. The music does a good job in setting up the tension during nighttime. Once the gates open at night and the monsters start spilling out, the music ramps up with a drum-based soundtrack that gets you in the mood for some traditional Japanese combat.
This is a new God story. 荒ぶる世の流れはとどまるところを知らず、村々はひとときの呼吸のように。
Last but not the least, let's talk about the story. I'm only putting this section at the end of the review because I feel it makes the least impact on the game. The story does a good job of setting up the game. You are introduced to your character So, and you are told that your only job is to protect Yoshiro, the maiden in distress. As the game goes on and you keep cleansing more villages, you are shown that Yoshiro is getting weaker and weaker, And if Yoshiro gets any weaker, you will lose your physical form and become a spirit. Apart from this, the story doesn't really have much impact on the moment to moment gameplay. Once a stage begins, you know what your goal is, and there are no big story twists in the middle of the night. And for most stages, once Yoshiro reaches the Torii Gate, you get to see the same cutscene showing a ceremonial cleansing dance, and the stage is done. So do not expect any heavy story beats apart from the start and end of the game. And for this kind of gameplay driven title, that's not a bad thing at all. A lot of the positive reviews for this game highlight the fact that it brings back the PS2 era style of gameplay with its level based progression and minimal focus on story. I think it goes back even further to the NES era. I mean, when was the last time you saw the words stage selection in a video game? Nostalgia aside, I feel this is a really strong modern title with immersive gameplay that deserves the attention of a larger audience. Kudos to Capcom for allocating enough resources to bring this title to life. Wikipedia claims the game spent over 4 years in development, and that seems to have been time well spent. A few gameplay design choices do hold it back from being a truly wonderful title, but it still guarantees you a good time despite the minor flaws. If you are an action game fan of any kind, definitely do not miss this one. It is available on Xbox Game Pass and is also generally available on PC and PlayStation platforms. Thanks for watching.